Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where we bring evidence, experience, and perspective to make sense of today's leading health challenges. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
This is Lindsay Smith Rogers. The holidays can be an intense time for everyone, but especially for those who are dealing with grief, whether it's recent or decades old. Today, I talk with Litsa Williams, a clinical social worker, and Eleanor Haley, who has a master's in counseling psychology, who are both co-founders of What's Your Grief, an online community for grieving people and grief support professionals. We talk about ways to approach celebrations or rituals, communication with loved ones, and the need to make more room for flexibility, honesty, and maybe even a little joy. Let's listen. Litsa Williams and Eleanor Haley, thank you so much for being on Public Health on Call. I am personally a huge fan of your podcast. It has helped me through some really rough times in the last few years, and also the body of work that you have on your website. We're coming into the holiday season, which can be a difficult time, whether grief is fresh and maybe it brings up grief that's decades old. So today we're going to talk about how people can think about this time. First, let's start off with a little bit about you and your work. Let's talk about What's Your Grief. So Eleanor, let's start with you.
Yeah. So What's Your Grief is an organization that we started about 10 years ago now, a little bit over 10 years. After working in the field of grief and bereavement for a while, Litsa and I met at a job where we were providing grief support to people at the time of a loved one's death, right at the hospital, and hospitals all throughout the state of Maryland. So we were meeting people at a time, just an unimaginable time. These were usually really shocking, unexpected events that people were going through. So we were meeting them then, and then we were providing aftercare support for 2 years if people wanted it, and longer if they felt that they needed it for longer. So we were meeting people from all different areas with all different types of losses, from all different walks of life, all over our state. And so we were trying to meet a lot of different needs. And one thing that we were finding is that we just weren't finding the resources that we needed. Something I'll share about us. My background's in counseling psychology. Litsa's background is in social work. So we're mental health professionals, but we both had experienced the death of a parent in early adulthood. So we were always looking at the resources out there through two lenses, the mental health lens, and also would we have used this in our grief? Is this how we would have talked about grief and loss? Would this have been helpful? And so we weren't finding what we needed. And after just complaining and feeling frustrated, we started What's Your Grief. We started as a website, just writing articles that we personally thought were relatable. So if you like to talk about grief like us, you might find them relatable, but for plenty of people, they might not. But we just started writing articles about every different topic we could think of, about loss of all types, non-death and death loss, and just life after loss, because that's a whole world of things that needed to be explored. And from there, we grew into offering all different types of support for people, different creative outlets. We have a lot of different creative projects. You mentioned we have a podcast. We recently published a book in the last year, or I guess a year ago now. We do a lot of professional trainings. One thing that we learned through many, many years of schooling, through getting master's degrees and certificates and things like that, is that unless you go to a really dedicated program that offers training on things like death and dying or thanatology, there really isn't a lot of training that people get in a lot of different professions that come into contact and provide support for people who are grieving losses of all kinds. And so we started doing a lot of training for professionals. So we're doing a lot of different things. We have a lot of different focuses. And really what we do is when we see a need in the area of grief and bereavement and life after loss, we sort of try and fill it, basically.
So, and now I want to turn to you, Litsa. Let's talk about the holidays in particular, and tell us a little bit about your background and experience in helping people through this time, and why is this a particularly difficult time in the context of grief?
Yeah, I think, for a lot of people, obviously the holidays are associated with family. And so immediately we are so aware of any gaps and holes, the people who are supposed to be there, who have always been there, who aren't there. And when our family doesn't look the way that it used to look, I think we're just so acutely aware of our grief and of that absence. And trying to figure out what it's going to look like as a family is really, really difficult when everything is going to feel different. So the traditions, I think for so many people, we can remember exactly where we were in holidays past, exactly what those holidays looked like and felt like. And there can be a feeling of confusion of like, should we try to recreate that and just have this absence there? Should we do something totally different? Should we just like fly to Hawaii and pretend that the holidays aren't even happening? And I think there is just a lot of that uncertainty for people about how they should approach the holiday season. So I think that's one of the reasons it feels like such a hard time is that confluence of it's a family time. We have these specific memories and traditions, and now we're feeling at a loss about what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to approach it this year.
So there's a big need in your field for, first of all, just this sort of grief support, and then that gets intensified around the holidays. So let's get into some specific tactics and ways that people can think about this. Whether that grief is very fresh or maybe it's decades old, maybe you've ignored the holidays for the last 10 years and now you're ready to start thinking about it. Where can people start? Litza, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we always try to encourage people to connect with is what are really the values behind the holidays that have always felt so important. People often get very focused on the what. What did we do? Where did we do it? Like those very specific things. And being able to start to reconnect with that why of the holidays. What were the things, those values that underpinned everything? Was it that sense of family and community? Was it that sense of gratitude and giving? Things like that, to start with that foundation and know that oftentimes the what can look very different, but when we're feeling connected to those whys, it can connect us in different ways to our own history, to the people who are gone, to remembering that even though they're not with us, we're still carrying forward certain values in our holidays that are important. And then from there, you can, I think, start to really explore the different traditions, the different things about your holiday season, where you may say, do we want to keep this? Do we need to change this? What do we want to be flexible about, and how flexible can we be? So I think that allows us a framework to start with. And it also allows a place to start conversation with family. And conversation is so important that we involve all of the people who are going to be touched by the holidays and really sit down together and think about what we want out of the holiday season.
So, Eleanor, have you come across a time in your work where maybe people come together and whether it's family, friends, chosen family, and they're not all on the same page? What happens then?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Litza kind of hinted at one of our number one tips that really is connected to this is that we really encourage people to plan ahead and communicate about plans, because I think one thing that we often do is set our holidays on autopilot. The holidays after a loss can feel like a secondary loss. You are losing what they used to be. And I think that there's a lot of resistance around accepting that things have to change, so much so that people often will just assume they can do things the way they always were. And so we've seen, I will share that I had this experience personally the first holiday season after my mother died. And we have heard it echoed time and time again that when there was a lack of communication, people went into things as though they were going to be the same and found first of all, these things do not feel the same at all. Second of all, there's so many different roles and shoes that need to be filled that without planning ahead, we don't know who's going to do those things. And oftentimes it'll fall on maybe the oldest sibling or the partner. And those people aren't necessarily even wanting to fill those shoes. They just do it out of responsibility and feeling that they should. And so they don't have the support that they need in doing that. And so without that communication, there can often be a lot of assumptions and a lot of misunderstanding about how things are going to go. So in that planning piece that Litza was talking about, we really encourage having, to whatever extent possible, open communication. And this is going to look different for every family. Some families, it's perfectly normal for them to get together for dinner and make a plan. Certain families maybe need to do it through email or text or playing telephone tag. But I think to whatever extent that you can plan ahead and communicate, it's going to be really important. And then be flexible, knowing that this is going to change, knowing that things are not going to be the same, knowing that there are going to be times where people feel emotional, where we have to lean on one another, and that things are not going to be perfect. And that is okay, because they could never be perfect, because a really important piece is missing.
Yeah. And I think some people may fall into a situation where maybe they can't get their family to agree or get out of these entrenched rituals, or regardless of which holiday it is. What if you decide to opt out? What if you decide, or maybe it wasn't by choice and you have to spend the holidays alone for whatever reason? What are some tools and resources and ways we can think about that? Let's go to you, Litsa.
Yeah, I think it's really important to figure out what is going to work for you. And if you realize you need a break this year, to get comfortable with that, to be able to communicate why that feels important to your family, why you need that break, if you're deciding to take it by choice. And it may not be an entire break, right? If your family is local, you may say like, hey, I want to come over for dessert, but I don't have the whole day in me, or I don't have the whole meal in me. I'm not feeling up to it this year. So being really thoughtful about if you can do a portion, if you can't do any of it all at all, and getting comfortable with the vulnerability of just sharing that with your family is, I think, that the first really important step. If you're spending the holiday alone, and whether that is by choice or not by choice, I think planning again is always the key for us. It may be that you plan to do absolutely nothing connected with that holiday. Like you just have a plan where you are going to watch your favorite movies all day and eat your favorite foods and just have that day of relaxing on your own. But being thoughtful in advance about what it's going to look like. Sometimes when people opt out of the holiday but don't make a specific plan for what they will do with the day, that's when it can start to feel really painful. And they're halfway through the day and the rest of the day feels endless. They just want to go and hide in bed. So having some sort of idea of what you might want to do with your day, even if it's not very structured, can be really important. If you want to connect with your loved one who died, or you want to really feel connected with the holidays in a different way, I think there are a lot of great opportunities to think about what that might look like. Is there a place you want to go that you've always felt close to that person? Or is there a cause or something that's connected to what they loved that you decide, okay, I'm not going to be part of the gift exchange or doing all that with the family, but maybe I make a donation instead to somewhere that I know meant a lot to them. Or I buy the gifts that I would have bought for them, but I donate it to a shelter instead, or do something with it that feels connected with those values, or even just something that you loved to do together. Also, and this goes for a holiday, whether you're spending it alone or together, food is such an important way that we connect to our history, we have such distinctive memories around food. It can be such a big comfort. So sometimes it may be that you decide to make foods that you really associate with that person. And that's something that you decide to make part of your day, whether that is a holiday alone or together.
There's all different kinds of loss and different family dynamics or chosen family dynamics. I want to ask, what is the role of trauma in all of this? Because I'm sure in your clinical experiences, does that look different? Are there other considerations? Eleanor, maybe we'll start with you.
I think making sure that you have the support that you need if you are feeling like you're really experiencing some trauma-like responses after experiencing a traumatic event or a potentially traumatic event. I think just really going easy on yourself and knowing you may have moments where things feel really intense and really difficult. And having those coping skills and coping tools at the ready to utilize them when you need them. But just really going easy on yourself, I think, is an important part of that when you're going through something that feels really, really big and overwhelming and intense at times. Just having those tools and those supports that you need is invaluable.
Litsa, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one thing I would add to that too is that sometimes you really will find that you might need breaks, right? You're engaging in the holiday, but something suddenly feels really activating or overwhelming. The holidays can be very overstimulating depending on your family situation. I think being upfront with people, saying, I'm really looking forward to the holiday. And also, like, things have been a little rough. I know I may need to take some breaks during the day. If I step out or excuse myself, please don't worry. I just may need some time to myself. Also, having like a person who you maybe feel like is your person that you can touch in with if you're getting overwhelmed, who maybe is tuned in to what you're going through, can help you to ground a little bit. One thing Eleanor and I talk about a lot is having escape plans from places, driving yourself somewhere, not necessarily getting yourself into a position where you've come with someone else and now you can't leave unless they want to leave. That can be something that, trauma or not, can start to feel a little claustrophobic if you're feeling overwhelmed by the holiday. So just keeping those things in mind and letting your family or your friends know up front, you may need a little bit of that space and those breaks.
So in general, you've talked about the holidays being overstimulating. You've got maybe a bunch of friends and family together, or maybe you don't have anything to do for the holidays, or maybe you have to work. Regardless, there's a lot of pressure. There can be a lot of stress around this time. So even if you haven't been through a loss, what are some suggestions that you have for approaching the holiday season? Like, how do we even begin? Let's start with you, Eleanor.
I feel like flexibility, it's one of those words that comes up time and time again when it comes to mental health. And it's just that idea of being okay with things going a certain way, but also being flexible if they don't. And having flexibility with oneself as well. Like, maybe I'm going to make it through this party and maybe I'm not. And that is okay. And giving yourself a little self-compassion. So I think just having the ability to have boundaries if you need them, to say no. I know that is so hard. I am not great at that. But especially this time of year when there are so many asks, this might be more than ever an important time to be able to draw those boundaries and say no. So just being flexible with oneself, with your experiences, and going with things. If you are experiencing sadness and emotions that feel distressing, but you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be happy. This is a happy time of year. Being flexible with that and making the space for those emotions to exist as well. Even though we feel like a Grinch when we're not always in a great mood, I have news for everybody. This is a time when there are a lot of people in the world who are feeling pretty sad for a whole wide range of reasons. It's just a lot of people don't feel like they can openly acknowledge that. So it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling, and it's okay to draw some boundaries. And it's okay if things aren't perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think a few suggestions that are sometimes helpful. I think sometimes remembering new traditions always had to start somewhere. It can be really valuable to think, okay, there's some traditions that are having to change, or maybe I'm not able to be exactly where I want to be with who I want to be with, but there's some new traditions that maybe they'll stick, maybe they won't, but I want to give a try to this year that feel like they might be really good. I think sometimes thinking about who are the people I really want to make part of my holiday season, maybe not the day itself, but just thinking about the winter holidays are a big span of time. So oftentimes we do get really in that rut of thinking about focusing on biological family, sometimes over found family and friends or coworkers or people who mean so much to us. But when we connect back to those values of the holiday season, of sometimes thinking, who are the people in my life who I really love and want to make part of this holiday season somewhere? And then maybe it is something that is just a totally small new tradition that you do as part of the holiday with friends or with just one friend. But thinking about that, and I think it goes to Eleanor's idea of flexibility. It's letting go of the idea that the holidays have to be one specific thing or look one specific way, and say, like, they can look like whatever you want them to look like, and that they can really be things that you can feel really good about. I think all the time about the Christmas after I got divorced. A friend and I spent like the entire day in bed watching movies, eating Chinese food, and because our families were all out of town and we didn't have anything. And we both look back on it. We're like, that was one of the best Christmases. And so I think sometimes it's that. It's going like, if it's going to look different, that's okay. It might end up still being a day that you have a lot of good memories around in different ways, even if it doesn't look exactly the same.
Yeah, I would add, I think it's important to remember that traditions, family traditions, friend traditions, they change all the time. We are always changing traditions. A lot of the time, we feel like it's our choice, or we feel like it's because something positive has happened. Maybe a new baby was born, or someone got married. And so there's a new person sitting around the dinner table. And so we have traditions. Our traditions are constantly changing and flexing. I think the hard part after something like a loss is that it doesn't feel like our choice. But I think it's important to remember that we are capable of changing. We've withstood change before, even though this is not at all what we would want. We don't want to change these traditions. There are little opportunities to make our loved one a part of those traditions in a way that keeps their presence around the holidays.
Yeah. And I think for me personally, just to add to the conversation a little bit, there's an immense amount of pressure that first holiday after someone dies to sometimes create new traditions. And it's like, no, it might take a few years to shake out before you find your groove and your new family or friends dynamic. And so again, this whole idea of flexibility and letting yourself off the hook, I think is very important.
Yeah. I have one more thing I'm going to add to this. I have kids, so it's always on my mind. The fact there is a lot of sadness, especially where kids are concerned. There is a lot of joy and excitement, and that's okay. And we want to allow for the possibility as grown-ups and adults to feel that joy and excitement ourselves. And know that feeling it does not mean that you're not grieving. It does not mean that you're any way forgetting or grateful for any loss-related experiences. But it just means that that is one emotion and one experience you are feeling in this big, big, big mix of things that you are feeling. So we definitely want to allow for the possibility of having more comforting, warm, positive experiences cognitively and emotionally.
Well, that is a great place to end this conversation. I want to thank you both so much for all of the work you do. And please know how many people out there you are helping. Eleanor Haley and Lisa Williams, thank you so much for being on Public Health on Call.
Thank you.
Public Health on Call is a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and Stephanie Desmond. Audio production by J.B. Arbogast, Holly Cardinale, Philip Porter, Spencer Greer, and Matthew Martin, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production support from Catherine Ricardo. Social media run by Grace Fernandez and Shian Briscoe. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Thank you for listening.